Finding upside wins you championships in fantasy football, but oftentimes we find that players that have high upside usually come with a wide variance of outcomes, including some risky downside. So Dave Kluge and I are going to take a look at 6 players here with high upside and some scary downside for the 2023 fantasy football season. This goes along with a new feature that you can find on our rankings over on footballguys.com, where we have a meter that has upside. Is this player likely to substantially outperform their ranking or ADP, or their downside? Are they likely to substantially underperform compared to their ranking or ADP? So, Dave, your first player that you have here is a running back that many fantasy analysts are really, really into. They really like going into the season because of his likely volume. His 2022 production was great. So how could there possibly be any downside to Patriots running back Rhamondre Stevenson?
Well, that's a great question. And I think that right now everybody is so blinded by the upside that they refuse to admit that there could be a modicum of downside in Rhamondre Stevenson's 2023 outlook. But I'm a little bit nervous here. I mean, obviously the upside is that he builds off of what we saw last year and finishes the season as an elite RB1. And considering where he's getting drafted, that's what the majority of fantasy drafters are expecting. But the downside here is that he is the new Damian Harris in the Patriots offense. I know it's disgusting to hear, but we have seen this year after year with Bill Belichick. He likes to have highly specialized roles for his running backs. And last year, we saw that as well. Ty Montgomery was supposed to be the pass catching guy, and then some early down and goal line work was going to get split between Rhamondre Stevenson and Damian Harris. But Damian Harris got injured. Ty Montgomery got injured, and the only 2 other guys on the team were Pierre Strong and Kevin Harris, who didn't have nearly enough experience to step into any sort of significant role in this offense. So Rhamondre Stevenson was shoehorned into a workhorse role, and it's the first time we've seen Bill Belichick feed a workhorse since Corey Dillon 20 years ago. I mean, this is just completely outside of his coaching tendencies. And we can look back just a couple of years ago at Damian Harris, who in 2021 was graded as PFF's best running back, all-around running back. We're talking run blocking, goal line work, passing down work. He was the best running back, and still going into 2022, he was in about a 50-50 split with Rhamondre Stevenson. So now we're looking at Stevenson, who is obviously a very talented running back, but it's tough for me to project Bill Belichick to just change 30 years of coaching tendencies and feed him the rock. So last year, like I said, injuries kind of opened up this opportunity. And if you look at it, no surprise, but Stevenson splits over the last 2 years. When he was playing with Damian Harris, he saw a decrease in attempts, targets, receptions, goal line work, passing down work, touchdowns, basically everything. He only saw that opportunity when Harris was injured. So now we're looking at a backfield where Rhamondre Stevenson is clearly the best of the backs, but Ty Montgomery, Pierre Strong, and Kevin Harris are there, each with a little bit more experience now. Now, I'm not projecting it, but there is a world where Ty Montgomery, who is an ex-wide receiver, and Pierre Strong, who profiles to be a very good pass catcher, take a stranglehold on the passing down work, and Kevin Harris, who's a very big-bodied guy who really only can do well between the tackles, takes on the goal line work. And what that would do is leave Rhamondre Stevenson in a role where he is getting early down work between the 20s, no targets, no goal line work, and that sets up for a very dangerous floor where we're looking at games without a touchdown. He's given us 6 or 7 points, and I just can't pay up for a guy right now who's going in the 2nd and 3rd round that has that kind of downside. Now, the upside is obviously there. He's a young and talented back who could see a lot of work, but he is very, very risky at his current ADP.
Yeah, we talk about Rhamondre Stevenson and how the risk is so associated with ADP, where they're ranked, all that. Right now on Football Guys rankings for half PPR, he is 20th overall behind Amon-Ra St. Brown. He's the running back 10 in our rankings between Nick Chubb and Breece Hall. And when you go with the Football Guys website, by the way, fantastic website, and all you have to do to get access to everything is just drop an email. That's it. It's really, really simple. When you go in there, you're going to see the profiles for these players. It's going to have the projections. It's going to have all of our rankings, any articles we might have on these players. It's very useful stuff. What you're going to see here is he is ranked as high as running back 8 in our rankings. And then someone, Dave, is it you, has him as low as running back 21 in the rankings. That's not you, right?
No, I have him as RB17. I'm not quite that low on him, but I think that I am, anticipating a bit more risk than people are projecting for.
Yeah, you talk about where he is in terms of ADP, right? We talked about the rankings there, but in terms of ADP, we look at NFFC, okay, which is high stakes tournaments who've actually partnered with Football Guys for the Football Guys Championship. But his ADP for NFFC is the early third round, ahead of Chris Olave, Brees Hall, and DK Metcalf. So I get it. He is a guy that showed he could produce last season. But with everything that you just mentioned there, Dave, looking at the upside, the downside, at that ADP in the early third round ahead of those players, is he worth the risk?
That's tough. Personally, I don't think so. I'd rather take a risk on the guy going right after him, who we already know has inherent risk, and that's why he's getting drafted where he is. But Brees Hall, who we saw getting every bit of work last year, regardless of who else was on the team or healthy. You know, they had Michael Carter there, they had James Robinson there. They haven't added anybody to that backfield, and we saw him have a stranglehold on all of the high value touches. We saw the big playability, and we know that he's coming off an ACL tear, and that's baked into the ADP. But as the season progresses, he's going to get better. That knee's going to get stronger. And as those weeks become more valuable, as you're trying to get into playoffs and win playoff matchups, I would much prefer Brees Hall over Rhamondre Stevenson, and you can draft him after.
And I still think there's a domino that could fall here, specifically with the Patriots, right? We don't know if they end up with DeAndre Hopkins, and that's a player that could end up on a number of different teams. We have no idea. But as these dominoes start to fall, whether it is a wide receiver like DeAndre Hopkins or it's a running back like Ezekiel Elliott, Leonard Fournette, Kareem Hunt, a lot of these teams where you look at a running back and say he's got a ton of workload ahead of him, we don't know that for sure yet. There's always surprise cuts and surprise signings that happen in camp. So these things could change really, really fast.
So I don't want to get off on too much of a tangent here, but you mentioned Leonard Fournette, and I think that's a name that people are forgetting about. And Leonard Fournette, I'll be the first to admit it, he didn't look great last year. He's probably, well beyond the apex of the age curve at this point, but he spent the last 2 years playing with Tom Brady, and we know Tom Brady has a tendency to coach up his running backs and get the best out of them. And then last year, when he was in that impending free agency, if you recall, he visited with the New England Patriots and was about to sign with them before he returned to Tampa Bay. So he seems like a guy that just would fit in a Patriots uniform. And I'm not expecting Fournette to be a 1,500-yard type of player at this point in his career, but he excels as a pass blocker. And he's another guy that can show up in New England and just siphon away all of that passing down work from Stevenson.
Yeah, I don't think that the Patriots are done adding to that running back room. I don't think they're going to go into the season with just what they have there. So Rhamondre Stevenson, while he's got plenty of upside, there still is some pretty inherent risk, especially with his average draft position as it stands currently. Now, before we get to our next player here, I want to remind you guys, if you're watching here on YouTube, please hit that like button, drop a question in the comments below, maybe about a boom bust, high upside, or crazy risky player that you're thinking about drafting for your team. Or if you're listening to the audio version of this, leave a quick rating and review for the show. It's a big deal for us. It helps us really continue our work here for all of you. Now, without any further ado, let's get to our next player here. And well, this is my guy that I put here for us, and it's another running back, Buccaneers running back, Rachaad White. Now, Rachaad White, it's kind of interesting, okay? Rachaad White, he was a guy that really outperformed what a lot of us thought he might do as a rookie. And now in Football Guys rankings for half PPR, he is 56th overall behind Tyler Lockett. Okay, he's the running back 24, sandwiched between David Montgomery and Alexander Madison, who I'm sure that ranking is going to start to slowly creep up there. But Rachaad White, he's a guy, Dave, when I pull it up, he is ranked as high as running back 15 or as low as running back 34. When we talk about volatility, that is crazy to have a difference of 19 spots there for Rachaad White. And these are the fantasy experts, right? These are people who should know as much as possible about Rachaad White and honestly feel comfortable about him, but they don't. Now, there's a lot of upside coming in here with Rachaad White. First of all, and this has nothing to do with numbers. Well, kind of a little bit with numbers. He changed his jersey number to number 1. That's a big W. Like it just looks cooler, man. Okay. It looks cooler. What was he last year? 29. Yeah. Number 1 looks way cooler than 29. So that's already a big plus in the upside. But what everyone points to with Rachaad White is the volume. The Bucs didn't really add any competition. It's very similar to what we're talking about with Rhamondre Stevenson, a running back who catches passes in the passing game and could get a big chunk of the rushing volume for this team. You look at the depth chart there for the Buccaneers. It's Chase Edmonds, who was really disappointing last season for the Miami Dolphins and then eventually the Denver Broncos. They still have Keyshawn Vaughn. They have undrafted rookie Sean Tucker, who still has not suited up for them. And then Miami Dolphins legend Patrick Laird, of course, there on the depth chart. So there's really not a whole lot surrounding Rachaad White. But once again, like this is a guy that we think the Bucs may not be done adding to that room. But we talk about what makes him valuable. It's the targets. Baker Mayfield has a career running back target rate of roughly 20%, which is it's actually pretty solid. It's above league average. But last year, that's where Rachaad White made so much of his, let's call it money, right? Like his fantasy money there. It was through the receiving game. Since 2013, there have only been 10 rookie running backs with 50 or more receptions in a season. Out of those 10, 8 finished as top 24 running backs in the following season. So it seems like Rachaad White is being drafted and ranked appropriately. And then out of those 8, 4 finished as top 12 running backs. So you start to see that there is a pretty good ceiling within range for Rachaad White if all of the receiving numbers stick. Now, the problem is that those receiving numbers don't necessarily stick when you lose Tom Brady, and you're talking about a team that's no longer passing at the crazy rate that they were last year. I take that same group of running backs that I was looking at. Since 2013, there was those 10 rookie running backs with 50 or more receptions. Out of those 10, only 1 actually improved on their fantasy finish the following season, and that was Christian McCaffrey. So you're talking about players that then have to become incredible outliers to improve upon their rookie campaigns receiving the ball. And everything right now sort of points in the opposite direction, that the Bucs offense is going to pass the ball less. They led the NFL with 45 pass attempts per game last year. This means the touches for Rachaad White become less valuable, even in half PPR. And then the Bucs offense is just going to be worse than they were last year. I can't imagine that a Baker Mayfield led offense is going to be, or a Kyle Trask led offense, God forbid, is going to be worse than a Tom Brady offense. We look at Rachaad White. He was one of the least elusive running backs in the NFL last season and ranked as one of the lowest in rushing yards over expectation. Dave, I know that's your favorite stat. You know what? Dave, do you mind explaining what rushing yards over expectation means for our audience?
Yeah, so I used to scoff this metric quite a bit. I use it through ESPN Next Gen, or I'm sorry, not ESPN. Now it's just Next Gen stats on their own. But it's a metric that really looks at everything, the run blocking and all that, kind of decides what a player's expected rushing yards should be and then grades them above or below that. And since you brought it up, I'm looking at it right now. He wasn't just bad, he was terrible. When you look at the very bottom of the list, he ranked 8th last in the NFL last year. The only guys behind him were Melvin Gordon, who looked awful in his stint in Denver, Michael Carter, who saw very limited work and was injured, James Robinson coming off the Achilles tear, Leonard Fournette, who we talked about probably being on the wrong side of the age curve at this point, Najee Harris, who played half the season with a plate in his foot, and Ezekiel Elliott, who can't even find a job now at 26 years old. So yeah, Rachaad White was not in good company there looking at that metric.
Yeah, Rachaad White was not one of my favorite running back prospects coming out of that class last year. But what saved him was the receiving work that came through. And without Tom Brady, with the change in offense, I don't think that stuff holds up. And so we talk about the NFFC, the high stakes average draft position. He's going in the middle of the 6th round. So whatever team you're looking at, he's likely, being drafted as your RB2, your 6th best player. Is he worth the risk in that case? It's close, but meh. I think I'd rather have the other guys that are going in that same range, like Brandon Ayuk, who I believe also has an incredible upside at his position. Or actually the next player that we're going to talk about, Dave, that you have here on the list that goes in the same round. That's a little tease for all of you that are, just listening or watching. But before we go on, I keep mentioning the NFFC, right? And, it's what is that? So this is a high stakes league that Football Guys has now partnered with. Okay. The NFFC in Football Guys are going to be bringing you the Football Guys Championship. This is your shot to win $350,000. Dave, what would you do with $350,000?
Buy half a house.
Just half a house.
I mean, I don't know if you've seen the market lately, but yeah,
in this economy,
would be a nice down payment on a home.
In this economy, Dave getting half a house. Is that what half bath means? It's just like a bathtub where the water just runs out of it. That's what it is.
Yeah,
cut right down the middle.
You move into half the house, and then what they do is they put up a rope, and then every couple of years, as you pay off more and more your mortgage, they open up more of the house to you. That's how it works in today's world. They out here in Colorado.
Gilligan's Island chalk line it right down the middle. So yeah, if you join into the Football Guys Championship, championship and you win, you yourself can purchase half a house just like Dave Kluge. Okay. And take advantage of these early draft rooms because right now player values and ADPs are all over the place. It could change. You never know where it's going to be. You could end up getting the steal of the draft here in June that helps you win the whole damn thing. Hashtag sorry, Joe. So all you have to do, click the link in the show description below, whether you're watching or listening, and you could start drafting for that big money today. Dave, you got another player that we're going to talk about. I teased this earlier, a player that's going in the same round in these high stakes drafts as Rachaad White. And we're talking about Falcons tight end Kyle Pitts.
Yeah. So it's so fun to plant flags and say, this guy is going to exceed his ADP, or this guy is going to come up so short of his ADP, and make those strong takes. And I wanted to do that with Kyle Pitts. I really, really did, because he's such a polarizing player. So I wrote almost a 2,000-word article on Kyle Pitts. And basically, the conclusion to this article was he's getting drafted exactly where he should be, and he could be really, really good at that value, or he can be really, really bad at that value. And I mean, looking at pure talent, you can really make an argument that Kyle Pitts is the best tight end in the league. And I'm sorry, Travis Kelce truthers. No disrespect is meant here, but on a efficiency basis, Kyle Pitts is just dominating the league right now. If you look at his rate metrics, which obviously come with a fat dose of context that we'll get into, but his rate metrics alone are absolutely ludicrous. 34.1% air yards share last year, ranked number one among all tight ends. He was number one in yards per target depth. He was number two in target share at 26.6%. I mean, that is like elite wide receiver target share that we're talking about there, and he's doing it as a tight end. Targets per route run, he was number three. Yards per route run, he was number five. The issue is that he was catching terrible passes from Marcus Mariota on a very, very small sample size. Now, so much was made of the Bears last year and how little the Bears passed. And I think because of that, people don't realize just how little the Falcons also passed. In the last 40 years, both the Bears and Falcons would have ranked in bottom 10 passing volume last year, and that's with the extra 17 game. I mean, it was just terrible how little these teams were passing last year. So it made it tough for anybody to really find success there. And we saw it in very little flashes, you know, a game from Kyle Pitts here and a game from Tyler Algier there. And Drake London had a nice little finish to the season as well. But there's something's going to have to give for Kyle Pitts to pay off this ADP. And there are a few routes where he can pay off. One is that Desmond Ridder just ends up being an elite quarterback. And Arthur Smith says, I need to change my scheme. I need to change my coaching tendencies. This guy is lighting him up through the air. Let's start running Kyle Pitts and Drake London all over the field and airing it out. Probably not going to happen, but it could. The more likely scenario, though, is that either Drake London or Bijan Robinson gets injured. And we never want to predict or project injuries, but it is the unfortunate nature of the NFL. Now, if one of those guys goes down, then all of a sudden, Kyle Pitts has an opportunity to not only grow his slice of the pie, but also start putting up better fantasy numbers. And we saw it as a rookie. You know, this guy had an abysmal touchdown rate that kept him from elite fantasy production. Despite all of these really eye-popping underlying peripheral metrics, he was still the tight end 11. And then going into year two, he increased his targets per route run, his yards per route run, his target share, and his touchdown rate, but still somehow saw a dip in fantasy production. So the downside is that he just does that again, like we've seen for the last 2 years, dominates on a per route basis, but the team just doesn't have the volume or the scoring power to live up to the lofty ADP that he's getting drafted at right now. But the upside is that things start to click in Atlanta and that he can give us a record-breaking season at the tight end position.
Are the Falcons the team with the most exciting skill players and the least exciting quarterback coach combo in the league?
Yeah. And I mean, really, if you look at it, it's kind of similar to last year, right? When we were talking about the Seattle Seahawks and everybody said, oh my goodness, DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett and Kenneth Walker, and they're going to be held back by Geno Smith and Pete Carroll. And guess what? They weren't. Talented skill players can make an offense good regardless of what the quarterback and coaching question marks might be. So this is a guy where, even though I said I don't really have a strong take, I'm happy to take him at ADP because the upside is so high.
Yeah, the question mark there for Arthur Smith is, does he hate fun? Does he hate points? Yes, he hates them both. Right now, we got Kyle Pitts in our Football Guys half PPR rankings, ranked as 71st overall, just behind Mike Evans. He's kind of in a very interesting, I don't want to call it a no man's land there, but you start to see when you look around at all the other players that are going in that same range or ranked in that same range of AJ Dillon, Javonte Williams, there's not a lot that I would necessarily take over Kyle Pitts because of the upside that he presents, Dave. When we look at Kyle Pitts in the profile here on footballguys.com, he is being ranked as high as tight end 4, which I think is very reasonable. And there's always one that hates these players. He's being ranked as low as tight end 11, which you also kind of pointed out that is possible. It is within the realm of possibilities. Where do you have Kyle Pitts ranked?
I've got him at tight end 4 as well. So pretty in lockstep with the consensus. But you say, he's ranked as tight end 11. Like that's like, this egregious ranking. He was a tight end 28 in per game scoring last year. And then even his rookie season, he eclipsed 1,000 yards and was still the tight end 11 in scoring. So, it sounds crazy because we see Kyle Pitts, he's got the draft pedigree and the size and all this stuff. But the reality is he's never finished better than tight end 11. So it's kind of crazy to rank him ahead of that, but we're all just waiting for it to finally work out.
Yeah, Kyle Pitts, I think he's the guy. This happens to us a lot where we just get really excited about draft prospects. And I don't think there's any denying his talent or his physical ability, but you start to hold on to those things. And sometimes you hold on to it for a little too long. And I think that's something that we saw with Evan Ingram for years. Everyone was really excited about his athleticism and how well he did as a rookie. And then things just never really came into fruition until he ended up on a new team. I'm not saying that's going to be the case with Kyle Pitts, but that's what this episode is about. It's all about talking about the volatility of these players and seeing what the potential ceiling and floor could be. And Dave, you mentioned it. What was it? The tight end, 20 something, 26, 28?
I think it was 28. I'd have to pull up
on a points per game basis. That's terrifying. That is absolutely terrifying to hear that for Kyle Pitts.
But then I know this is a 2023 show, but from a dynasty perspective, this is exactly why you want to buy Kyle Pitts, like you said with Evan Ingram, because we saw for years he struggled in New York, and then boom, change of scenery, and Evan Ingram is elite. So the same thing could happen to Kyle Pitts at any given moment. Imagine Kyle Pitts in the Los Angeles Chargers offense. He'd realistically be getting ranked right now as the tight end 1 ahead of Travis Kelce, but it's just this Falcons offense holding him back right now.
Well, change of scenery or even just a change within Atlanta, right? Like, there's no promises that Arthur Smith is going to be there next season or that Desmond Ridder is going to be the quarterback. There's a lot of things that could take place there. But yeah, I do agree with you. You should be buying him in Dynasty. Let's get to our next player here. And this was the guy who must not be named for all of last season for a lot of it. Deshaun Watson, quarterback for the Cleveland Browns, and the Football Guys has him ranked right now as 134th overall. Okay, he is ranked as the quarterback 10 between Daniel Jones and Kirk Cousins, ranked as high as quarterback 6 and as low as quarterback 15. So that gives you a difference in ranking of about 9 there. With Deshaun Watson, I think there's some very obvious upside that we've seen it before. We've seen what he can do, especially when he was, in Houston. Reports out of Cleveland now are that the Browns offense is changing to a more spread out passing attack. They already have Amari Cooper. They have David Njoku, Donovan Peoples-Jones, David Bell. Now they added Elijah Moore. They went out and drafted Cedric Tillman. They added Marquise Goodwin, another fast receiver, while letting Kareem Hunt walk in free agency. So there's an obvious shift here in personnel, which typically lends to an obvious shift in strategy and in the way that they're going to play. Now, the last time that Watson actually played a full season, he was the quarterback 5 overall. And something like that is always within his wheelhouse. It is within the realm of possibility for Deshaun Watson. In the past, he's been a very accurate quarterback who limits turnovers. He has rushing upside. And we didn't necessarily get to see all of that last year. But I think, Dave, when we were talking about this before the show off camera, is that there is a chance that it's just rust being shaken off. And the Browns, this sounds crazy, but they may not be done adding to that wide receiver room. We mentioned DeAndre Hopkins as being a guy that could get added to any team. He's got that relationship with Deshaun Watson, and him going to Cleveland could just absolutely skyrocket Deshaun Watson into a very realistic top 5 quarterback in terms of fantasy because of the tools around him and because of the athletic upside that he possesses. Now, the downside, once again, also seems very obvious. There's no way around it. Deshaun Watson was really bad last season. Okay, he was averaging 183 passing yards per game, only 7 touchdowns and 5 interceptions. His 15.1 fantasy points per game was not good. And it was very similar to, you want to hear the names, Dave? Carson Wentz and Marcus Mariota, two quarterbacks that no longer have starting jobs. I also conveniently left Aaron Rodgers out of that equation because he was very highly coveted. But right now, his ADP is quarterback 8. Okay, we talk about that for those NFFC high stakes leagues. Downside or risk, like we've been mentioning, is always relative to cost. And for me, David, I think you feel differently. I think that the cost for Deshaun Watson right now, being that late 5th round pick, I don't like that very much. And I think it adjusts based on which website you're looking at. But his current cost and average draft position right now, I'm not a big fan of it. I think it will start to go down as we get closer to the season. But right now, there are 5 quarterbacks being drafted after him that all finished as top 10 quarterbacks last season. Maybe they don't all possess the same type of upside, and if that's what you're going for with quarterback, which you honestly should, yeah, Deshaun Watson makes sense. But I'm going to list these 5 quarterbacks that are being drafted after him: Trevor Lawrence in the 6th round, Kirk Cousins in the 7th round, Jared Goff in the 8th, Daniel Jones in the 9th, and then Geno Smith is going as the quarterback 16 in the late 9th round. All these guys were top 10 quarterbacks last year. And here we go. I actually have the correct ADP now. I fixed myself. Deshaun Watson, he's going as the first pick of the 6th round. So if that's the case, if I'm staring down Trevor Lawrence or Deshaun Watson, Dave, I know my answer. I actually want to ask you, who would you go with there in that scenario? Trevor Lawrence or Deshaun Watson?
So that's a tough one for me. And as you listed those guys, Trevor Lawrence is the only one that I had to kind of think about for a little bit. And I do have Watson ahead of Lawrence in my rankings, but I could make a strong argument to put Lawrence ahead of Watson as well. But I'm easily taking him ahead of these other guys that you talked about, Tua and Goff and those guys. You know, you mentioned that the last time we saw Deshaun Watson play a full season of football, he was the QB5 in scoring. Well, that was the worst season he ever had as a fantasy quarterback. He had never finished below QB5 unless you look at his rookie season when he only played half a year and was actually the QB1 overall in scoring. So for me, you touched on it a little bit, but you want upside when you're drafting quarterbacks. And is it possible that Kirk Cousins outscores Deshaun Watson? Absolutely. But is Kirk Cousins, does he have that QB1 overall upside like Deshaun Watson does? I don't think so. So I think taking Kirk Cousins is playing not to lose, where drafting Deshaun Watson is playing to win.
Yeah, I get you, and you're slowly converting me here on the show. Where I understand it. Like, that's how you have to look at these things, right? Like, you have to go into your drafts with a philosophy of, what is it that you're looking for? Like, kind of how you said, are you playing not to lose? Are you just trying to play to have a safe quarter? You can get Kirk Cousins, Jared Goff, and that's as vanilla as you're going to get, or you can go for some of these high upside guys. But there's going to be a cost that comes with that. And I think that's just kind of the decision you have to make, is when you're staring down that round, Deshaun Watson, does it present more value to have him maybe stacked with an Amari Cooper, right? And that's where you start to make those changes. So a lot of it's going to depend on team build, but like this is what we're talking about, man. There's lots of upside to these guys and some inherent downside and risk. Now, another quarterback that similar skill set, Anthony Richardson, Colts quarterback. He's a rookie. Dave, this one is interesting because we don't really have anything to go off of.
Yeah, and it's tough. Usually I try to build a case with numbers, and it's just so rare that we see college production translate directly into NFL production. So when I'm talking about Anthony Richardson, I'm going to get a little bit more behind the game theory here and the way that fantasy analysts have kind of changed the game. In recent years, you used to be able to draft these guys, and they had no downside because you were drafting them at the very end of your draft. I mean, look at Lamar Jackson coming in as a rookie. Even Justin Fields was getting suppressed in value as a rookie. Trey Lance was the last time that we saw a guy really get pushed up draft boards as a rookie. And that's because we had years of Nick Mullins and Jimmy Garoppolo and subpar talents being successful in that offense. But now I think that people are getting a little ahead of their skis with Anthony Richardson. And of course, the upside is undeniable. The upside is that we see exactly what we saw from Justin Fields last year, slow-paced offense, but the quarterback's running the ball a lot, and he's getting his value on the ground and sneaks in as an elite QB1 finish. And that's why he's getting drafted where he is. Depending on the website, I'm seeing some places rank him as high as QB8. Other places are as low as QB14 or QB15. But regardless, it seems like that edge that we had in years past of being able to draft these high upside rookies. I mean, I can go back Patrick Mahomes, Deshaun Watson, Josh Allen, Kyler Murray. All of these guys were getting drafted at the very, very ends of drafts where they only had upside from there. But now you're passing on guys that we had talked about, like Kirk Cousins and Jared Goff, in lieu of Anthony Richardson. And the downside is that he does what a lot of rookies do, that we saw Justin Fields do as a rookie, that we saw Trevor Lawrence do as a rookie, which is struggle and put up terrible fantasy production. And they've got no slouch at QB2 right now in Indiana either with Gardner Minshew. Now, I'm not saying Gardner Minshew is a better quarterback than Anthony Richardson, but we see it oftentimes. I mean, you can attest to this, Alfredo, as a Miami fan. We saw Tua Tagovailoa getting pulled on and off the bench for the first 2 years of his career as they were trying to develop him. And we can see a similar setup with Anthony Richardson. So where he's getting drafted right now, wherever you want to place it. Where do we have him on Football Guys? QB 13, I believe.
Yes, we've got him at QB 13 between Geno Smith and Dak Prescott. And once again, I think that kind of goes back to that conversation of, are you really shooting for the high upside, the crazy rushing ability of Anthony Richardson? Or do you like the safety of a Dak Prescott? Or I don't know, quote, safety on Geno Smith?
Yeah, and I'm proud of Football Guys for being a little bit more level-headed in their approach here and not getting as crazy as some of the QB8 and QB9 rankings that I've seen on some other places, but still passing up on a guy like Dak Prescott for Anthony Richardson, that's the downside right there, that you're passing up on Dak, who was the overall QB1 just a few years ago, and you're passing up on him for a guy that we don't even know if he's going to start a full 17 games. And of course, kind of trying to, compare to Justin Fields like I was, a little bit different because we got to assume that Shane Steichen coming in from Philadelphia, the way that he tailored the offense around Jalen Hurts, we got to expect him to do the same thing for Anthony Richardson, where Matt Nagy was basically trying to turn Justin Fields into like Alex Smith, or I don't know what he was trying to do, fitting a square peg into a round hole there. But you got to assume that Shane Steichen is going to be a little bit smarter than what Matt Nagy did in 2021, but there still is inherent downside there that Anthony Richardson just struggles to get up to speed as a rookie and has to cede a few games here and there to Gardner Minshew. And you're paying up for a guy ahead of like Dak Prescott, who we know is starting 17 games, who we know has huge upside. And you're doing it for Anthony Richardson. There's a lot of downside there that I think that people are just kind of afraid to talk about.
Yeah, honestly, and this is where I kind of had to reflect on myself and what am I doing in drafts? I'm trying to avoid Indianapolis Colts skill players at all costs, simply because we don't know what that offense is going to be like. Sure, Shane Steichen is really exciting and Anthony Richardson is really exciting. Are they exciting this year? How does that rushing quarterback affect a runner like Jonathan Taylor? Does Anthony Richardson actually target the running back like that here in the NFL? Michael Pittman, we typically see wide receivers don't do well with rookie quarterbacks, especially one with such little experience starting games. So yeah, I'm very worried about this. And you can actually see this here on the website, how crazy and how volatile it is in the way that our experts at Football Guys are ranking him as high as quarterback 7 and as low as quarterback 25. So there is someone on staff that believes like, listen, this is a top 8 quarterback because of his rushing side alone. And there's someone who's like, I'm not drafting him even as a QB2, right? So there is just a wide range of outcomes here for Anthony Richardson. And I think it's fair to look at it that way. I agree with you, Dave. I'm happy that we are being pretty level-headed here and we have him overall as a staff here, consensus quarterback 13, because I think that's fair. Also, dude, you got to put like $10 in the Chicago Bears jar this show. Every time you mention the Chicago Bears, you're going to put $1 in the jar. That's it. We're just going to make that a thing.
I brought him up a few times. Sorry about that.
A few times. So we look at Anthony Richardson. We talk about the downside and where the risk comes up. NFFC high stakes ADP has got him in the late 8th round. So I will pose the question that I've been asking you for all these prospects, players, Dave. Is he worth the risk there in the late 8th round if you're, taking him over some of these other quarterbacks like a Geno Smith, Dak Prescott that you can get later?
So you're asking somebody who's going to do about 1,000 best ball drafts this offseason. And taking that approach, give or take, yeah. I'll take the over at 1,000. But, when you're drafting that many teams, I want to have exposure to everybody because at the end of the day, I could be wrong. I don't sit here and pretend to have a ball that's going to tell me all the answers. I try to study as much as I can and go into these drafts with as much knowledge as possible. But at the end of the day, I could be wrong. So I'm still drafting Anthony Richardson here and there. But you look at, about 8% is if you're drafting consistently, 8% exposure on a player would be, taking him in about 1 in 12 drafts. Currently, I'm at 5% Anthony Richardson. So a little bit below market. I'm sprinkling him in here and there because I could be wrong. But I think that there's just a lot of downside and you're giving up on the opportunity to draft a lot of really good, safe players for somebody who has a ton of downside in Richardson.
Let's take a look at our last player here. And this is a wide receiver that just lit the fantasy world on fire last season as a rookie. And it is Packers wide receiver Christian Watson. In the Football Guys rankings for half PPR, we have him at 52nd overall. He's the wide receiver 23 between Chris Godwin and Jerry Jeudy. We take a look at his profile over here on Football Guys, and well, he's ranked as high as wide receiver 14 and as low as wide receiver 40. If there was ever a player that we were going to talk about for this episode, it appears that it would be Christian Watson in terms of where he's ranked amongst the experts here at Football Guys. To have such a crazy, disparaging difference of 26 spots at the position of wide receiver, which honestly, like Dave, between you and I don't know, doesn't it seem like wide receiver is one of the more easy positions to predict because you can kind of take a look at target volume and how teams are going to pass and you think, am I crazy in thinking that?
No, absolutely not. And I talked about that when I did like a deep dive on each position this offseason. I said wide receivers are the position that we're best at projecting for. Like if you look at the top 10 wide receivers at ADP and you look at the top 10 scoring wide receivers at the end of the year, they're usually pretty dang close. But Watson, man, this dude is a unicorn because the underlying peripherals were kind of gross, but the big playability that I could score from anywhere on the field if I get the football in my hands, Watson has that a lot of other people in the NFL don't.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing, right? That's what lends this player just transcending of what we even think when we look at wide receivers and thinking they are easy to look at, is that there's an elite level athleticism there that could just make him, honestly, I think easily a top 10 wide receiver in the league because of the athleticism, right? And with all this upside, there's a legit chance. We talked about Aaron Rodgers not being good last year. There's a legit chance that Jordan Love could be better for Watson this season than Aaron Rodgers was in 2022, which just sounds very weird to say, but there is a chance that happens. Rodgers, he was 24th in fantasy points per game amongst quarterbacks that played at least 6 games last year. So really, Jordan Love just kind of has to show up and not be awful. And it's already a better quarterback for Christian Watson. And I think everyone has spouted these stats for Christian Watson. But when you go back and you look weeks 10 through 17, remember, I'm not vouching. I'm saying this is the upside play. This is where the upside comes into play. Weeks 10 through 17, he was the wide receiver 9 in fantasy points per game, targeted on 24% of his routes run, which was 15th in the NFL in 2022. And the thing with Christian Watson is he wasn't getting these like little dink and dunk targets that we saw happen with Jalen Waddle in his rookie year. Christian Watson was getting targeted with valuable targets. Okay. His yards per route run is what actually stood out to me the most at 2.26. That was 11th in the NFL last season. And this actually becomes a pretty important metric, Dave. I know you're probably bigger on the numbers and metrics than I am, but this was something that really stood out to me because you don't send bad receivers on deeper routes. You don't consistently do that. Do you have a couple of guys that you're like, hey, just go run a 9 and then fly down the field? Sure. But to have them consistently doing this, you don't typically do that. And when you go and look at the top 10 wide receivers last year in yards per route run with at least 60 targets in the year, it's Tyreek Hill, Justin Jefferson, AJ Brown, Jalen Waddle, Devontae Adams, Chris Olave, Cooper Kupp, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Stephon Diggs, CeeDee Lamb. That's your top 10. Christian Watson was number 11 of meeting all the same criteria as those guys. So is the upside there? Absolutely, 100%. Now we've got to factor in what's the downside and what's the cost with this player. So the downside with him, I think, becomes pretty obvious, right? The Packers added a whole bunch of players in the NFL draft. They added slot wide receiver Jaden Reed, 2 tight ends, Luke Musgrave and Tucker Kraft. All 3 of these players with day 2 picks, right? So they are really investing on putting weapons around Jordan Love. And there's a possibility with that the targets get spread around a bit more to players that are maybe just running simpler routes, not having to go as far downfield, not getting as much attention as a Christian Watson. And it just becomes something where they are looking to make things very easy for Jordan Love. And that's within the realm of possibility here. Also, Jordan Love could just be an absolute disaster. We really don't know. Like, we have no idea. He could be awful. So these are the things that you have to consider when taking a look at the cost of a Christian Watson in your drafts. And that's not to mention the Packers could also become very run heavy without Aaron Rodgers. It just becomes a really weird, slippery slope where everything starts to snowball, that things could go either really great for Christian Watson and he's this like top 10, 12 wide receiver in fantasy football, or just like how he's ranked here, all of a sudden he's barely a wide receiver 3 if everything just goes awful for him. I think the first thing that people will point out, though, is going to be that touchdown rate. Dave, you mentioned he was scoring from all over the field, and it's true. He only had 5 red zone targets on the season. He was scoring from everywhere, and it's great to see that. But the touchdown rate was just unsustainable. 10% touchdown rate. To give you context, the leader in the NFL amongst wide receivers last year was Devontae Adams with an 8% touchdown rate there. So yeah, the risk certainly seems to present itself pretty obviously. And he's wide receiver 23 in the Football Guys rankings. He's being drafted as the wide receiver 20 on underdog best ball drafts. And then when we look at the NFFC high stakes ADP, he is going as a late 5th round wide receiver. So with all that, Dave, I'm going to ask you this, and I'm going to give my opinion. Where are you at on Christian Watson? Because this little study, looking at it, for me, it helped me sort of formulate an opinion on him. But I want to ask you, where do you sit with Christian Watson?
So Watson is one of the guys that I am most bullish on drafting this year. We talked about exposure and 8% being that average clip. Christian Watson is my 4th most rostered wide receiver right now through a little over 100 drafts. I have him in 21% of my drafts. The upside is undeniable. I mean, the upside is that he finishes the overall wide receiver 1 this year. And obviously that would take, Jordan Love working out a little bit to really hit that super high end range of outcomes. But even if Love can't get things worked out, Matt LaFleur has a knack for scheming his best player open. And right now, looking at Aaron Jones, who's getting up there in age a little bit, and looking at the surrounding cast around Christian Watson, he is far and away the best player. So they are going to feed him. And where he was seeing a lot of 9s and deep balls last year from Aaron Rodgers, might not be able to sync up with Jordan Love on that same type of work, but he'll be getting slants and screens and end arounds. They're going to do whatever they can to get the ball in Christian Watson's hands. So Christian Watson is a guy at that wide receiver 20 price tag that I can't get enough of.
Yeah, I'm in full agreement with you, Dave. After doing this little deep dive on him, it just everything sort of lends to, man, as long as Jordan Love doesn't suck, Christian Watson could really break out in a big way, even further than what we saw from him last year. He's a guy that has let's call him top 6, top 5 wide receiver potential, and you're getting him at a low wide receiver 2 cost. That's the ideal fit that you're looking for when you're talking about upside plays and draft values and all that. So yes, I'm in full agreement with you there on Christian Watson.
Now, real
Dave,
quick, did you happen to see Jordan Love? And again, I'm sorry, I'll drop $1 in the bucket right here. But did you see Jordan Love yesterday with his attempt at smack talking Bears, where he wished Bears fans everywhere a very happy Father's Day? Posted the video, and then is just getting shredded on social media because he basically admitted that he is the son of the Chicago Bears, despite never even playing a game against them. Just a weird attempt at smack.
That's weird. That's weird energy. That's very weird energy from Jordan Love, and I think it just totally changed my opinion here on Christian Watson. Like, that ruined everything. All the cool stuff that we said over the last few minutes here, gone right now because of Jordan Love. Well, Dave, thank you so much for joining me this week. It's nice to be back after a vacation. A little rusty getting back on the mic, but it's fun to be back here talking with you, man. We will be back next week with another episode of the Pretend GM. Thank you for watching and listening all the way through. Adios.